All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Scent Bubble. This is an episode of Hot Takes. Now, let me tell you something in full transparency. I'm a little pissed off because I went to Sephora and I had an intention, and my intention was to evaluate Dior Sauvage, Eau de Toilette, Eau de Parfum, Parfum, and Sauvage Elixir EDP, as well as a couple of other fragrances. And then I brought them all out to my car. I had the test strips out, and I did 2 episodes of Hot Takes prior to this. Now, because I have a brand new car, my Bluetooth likes to not tell me when it goes into the car. So as I'm filming myself in the car and I'm seeing myself talking, I'm going through the full review. Now, about 20 minutes later, after shooting the 2 videos, I take the videos home and I'm like, nice, we just did a thorough analysis of all these fragrances for the people and it's going to be valuable. What happens? I get home and I realize the audio was muted the entire time because it was filming it in visually, but the audio was translated into the car and so the mic was off. So mad, so pissed off. So now I'm standing here having to recall a memory that I had last night with already reviewing these fragrances, and I'm going to have to draw from memory even though I don't have the fragrances in front of me. The good thing that is for you guys is that I have the memory of an elephant and I'm around fragrances so much and I talk about fragrances so much, I remember everything I said and my evaluation still stands, even though I don't have the fragrances in front of me. Now, point of the video today is, first off, let's talk about Sauvage. Any of you guys that are in FragCom at all, somewhere in your journey early on, you will hear about these kind of flagship fragrances in your local designer store, Sephora and Ulta Beauty. You'll hear about Bleu de Chanel, you'll hear about Gucci, you'll hear about Sauvage. These are all kind of flagship fragrances that are almost like rites of passage for being a designer collector. These are some of the most complimented, most sold designer fragrances out there, and Sauvage falls into that category. It's kind of like this bad boy, edgy fragrance that has still a little bit of sweetness and seduction in it, but it's got some brashness and some aggressiveness to it, as opposed to something more sweeter or something more naturally fresh like Bleu de Chanel, which is classy but doesn't really have a bad boy feel to it. The marketing on Sauvage was timeless and brilliant, being that they put, the Pirates of the Caribbean guy on that as kind of this edgy guy where it's both sweet and seductive, but then edgy and mysterious. And I think that that translates into the fragrance perfectly. Now, reason you guys are here is because you at some point will want to know, well, there's Dior Sauvage and then there's Dior Sauvage Elixir, and they smell kind of different. Which one do I get? But before you get to seeing the difference between Dior Sauvage and Dior Sauvage Elixir, your first problem might be this one, and that is, if I like Dior Sauvage, which one do I get? Eau de Toilette, Eau de Parfum, or Parfum? Now, generally speaking, as you move up, you do get a little more complexity in a fragrance, but you also get a little bit less performance somewhat. But it's very circumstantial. Every fragrance house is different. For instance, an Eau de Toilette might be traditionally weaker, but in a fragrance like Versace Eros, the blue bottle, you can still get 10 plus hours on the Eau de Toilette. So it might not factor in as much. You might want the louder, more brighter, projective fragrance, or just the cheaper fragrance, because generally speaking, an Eau de Toilette costs less because it's the first fragrance that comes out, at least back then. So the first question I'm going to answer is, what is the best Dior Sauvage? Eau de Toilette, Eau de Parfum, or Parfum? And the answer is quite simple in my evaluation. The Eau de Toilette you should never really take into consideration, even for the price, because it is significantly weaker. The main difference between Dior Sauvage and Dior Sauvage Elixir is a ramp up in projection and performance and a slight change in DNA geared more towards a more masculine audience, whereas Dior Sauvage maintains a kind of timeless freshness that still has its masculinity, but it's light and fresh enough to be worn by all ages. So if we're only deciding on Dior Sauvage, really you're left with the EDP and the Parfum. I don't think it's a lose situation at all, whichever you pick. I find the EDP to be longer in performance slightly, and the Parfum to be a little bit weaker in performance, but I think all of them are 8 hours plus performance fragrances as far as Dior Sauvage is concerned. The EDP is a little bit brighter in the top and in the opening with the freshness, and it's a little bit sweeter. And I find that with the Parfum, the sweetness is slightly scaled down and it's a little bit more peppery, a little bit more edgy and aggressive. Those rules reverse slightly to the Parfum. So I would say if you're a more masculine guy, like 25 and up or something, the Parfum makes more sense, but you might lose a little bit of performance. Whereas with the EDP, it's kind of the timeless, great performing Sauvage in the category. So I think EDP works all ages. Parfum is really only if you want the sweetness kind of dialed down and the edginess kind of dialed up. So that answers which one's better in the Dior Sauvage line. Now, as far as Sauvage Elixir, what you're getting is a much more projective, peppery, aggressively edgier experience with the vanilla, not the vanilla, but whatever the sweetness is in the fragrance, it's ramped down even more, and it leads in more of the freshness and the spiciness with the sweetness kind of more in the background. And I find it to be a fragrance that sits 25 and up, maybe even 30 and up in terms of age category. These are all seductive lady killer compositions. Again, I think if you're a young guy, you stay with Dior Sauvage. And by young, I mean 30 and down. You really should just stay with the EDP or the Parfum. I think the EDP is just the go-to safe one. But if you find yourself as an avid collector and you want a little bit more richness, a little bit more complexity, a little bit of a role reversal, slightly less sweet, you'll go with the Parfum. But I think the EDP notoriously across the board is the most blind buy worthy, but you're not going to lose a ton of performance or a ton of the DNA from fragrance to fragrance. They're both pretty much the same fragrance. We're talking about a 10% subtlety change between the two. Now, if you're an older male and you don't mind more aggressive fragrances, I do think Dior Sauvage Elixir is the better fragrance and the more popular fragrance because it takes all of the elements, the pepperiness, the earthiness, the sweetness, the freshness, and it makes much more of a denser, aggressive fragrance, which is why I think younger people can't really get into Dior Sauvage Elixir because it has a little more chest hair, a little bit more edginess to it. So generally speaking, I would say Elixir is better than Dior Sauvage Original. But if you're a young guy, 25 and down, just stick with the EDP. It's a phenomenal fragrance, mass appealing, big seller of a fragrance. And if you're a young guy and you want to be more daring and have the louder fragrance, then just go with Sauvage Elixir and call it a day. But if you're not familiar with fragrances that are natural, fresh, spicy with the sweetness, it might feel a little bit intimidating for you in the same way that young kids that generally try Dior Fahrenheit are quite off-put by the change in mood, so to speak. But I think, again, general rule of thumb is 25 and down, go Sauvage EDP. If you're an older guy but still want a fresher fragrance, go with the EDP or the Parfum. But most people 30 and up notoriously will go with Sauvage Elixir, and that I think is the most sold fragrance. But I'm not sure. Don't fact check me on that one. Hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions as far as your Sauvage and Sauvage Elixir purchases are concerned or any other considerations, please let me know in the comments below. And this was your hot take of Dior Sauvage EDT, EDP, Parfum, sized up against Dior Sauvage Elixir EDP, and how to navigate that boat ride in terms of which one you should put your nose on. I don't think you lose in any scenario other than Dior Sauvage EDT because you lose a lot of stuff. You lose DNA, richness, complexity, aggressiveness, and it's like there's way more refinement as you go down the line. So the other three are just as valid, and just determine which one fits for you guys. Stay blessed. Peace.